Get her out of here. Your poverty-stricken, judgmental mother is ruining my perfect day. The voice of my daughter-in-law, sharp as shattered glass, tore through the silence of the gilded ballroom, killing my heart instantly. I stood there, a 72-year-old woman, in a dress I had saved an entire year's worth of meager profit to purchase, feeling the weight of 300 pairs of eyes burning holes into my worn, aged skin. The air in the Grand Hyatt ballroom, thick with the scent of lilies and $2,000 champagne, suddenly became thin and poisonous. My own son, Patrick, who stood inches from Serafina, the bride, did nothing. He just looked down, his face a mask of shame and compliance, a man choosing a fleeting obsession over a lifetime of unwavering love. This was not just a wedding, it was an execution. An execution of the woman who had sacrificed everything, her youth, her peace, her entire self, to give him a better life. If you are a mother, you understand the silent vow we make the moment we hold that tiny, fragile human being. We promise them the moon, the stars, and a life free from the struggles that broke us. I made that promise to Patrick 35 years ago, the day I buried my late husband, Arthur. Arthur left me nothing but debt, a mountain of debt that totaled nearly $200,000, and an unborn child. He had poured every penny into the Sunstone Vineyard, a 100-acre patch of sun-drenched, debt-ridden land, convinced it would make us rich. When he died suddenly in a vineyard accident, everyone told me, "Eleanor, sell it. Take the money, pay the bank, and move to the city. You know nothing about running a vineyard." But the land was Arthur's dream, and now it was my burden, and my promise to Patrick. I didn't know the first thing about growing grapes. I was a waitress who had only seen the vineyard on postcards. But I was a woman who was tired of being pitted. I refused to let the world decide my fate. I kept the vineyard. I remember my early days, waking up before the first hint of sunrise, my 37-year-old body already aching from a night spent wrestling with fear. I left baby Patrick with Mrs. Rodriguez, a kind neighbor, and worked 2 jobs, cleaning hotel rooms during the day and waitressing at night. I slept for perhaps 4 hours, my hands constantly raw from detergent and the cheap soap at the diner. Every single dollar, every penny, was earmarked. Not for a new dress, not for a vacation, but for paying down the crushing interest on the bank loans. 5 long years of pure, relentless grit, and I finally paid off the last $180,000 of Arthur's debt. When the debt was gone, I turned my attention to the neglected vines. I had to learn everything from scratch. I read 20 different books on viticulture, attended every free seminar within 200 miles, and worked alongside the hired hands, learning to prune, tie, and harvest. They laughed at me, the 34 workers on the neighboring estates. A woman running a winery? You'll be back waiting tables in a year, Eleanor. But the first harvest, though small, tasted like pure victory. I sold that first batch of Pinot Noir for a humble $25,000, enough to buy a used tractor and pay off a small fraction of the next year's expenses. The Sunstone Vineyard grew, not overnight, but inch by grueling inch. From 100 acres, it grew to 200 acres, then 350 acres, becoming one of the most respected, boutique wineries in Napa Valley, and all of it, every single glass of award-winning wine, was for Patrick. I sent him to the best private schools, paid $40,000 a year for his college tuition at an Ivy League business school, money that could have rebuilt my old, dilapidated farmhouse 5 times over. I wore the same clothes for 10 years, drove a rusted-out 2008 Ford pickup, and never took a vacation. He will have the life I could not, I told myself. He will see the world, not just the dust of the vineyard. And what was my reward? To stand on a marble floor, paid for by the $90,000 profit from my best single vineyard sale, and be told to get out. Serafina, dazzling in a bespoke gown that cost more than the first 3 harvests combined, looked down her delicate nose at me. She was 28, cold, and calculating. I had spent nearly $95,000 on this wedding, the flowers, the food, the open bar, and yet, the moment I arrived, she saw me not as a benefactor, but as a stain. "You heard my fiancé, Mother," Patrick finally spoke, his voice low, lacking all conviction. "She's upset. Just, go. We'll talk later. We'll talk later." A promise of reconciliation delivered with the coldness of a farewell. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I just turned and walked away. Each step was agony. My 72-year-old knees protested inside the stiff, unfamiliar leather heels. As I walked past the beautifully arranged tables, I could hear the hushed whispers, "Poor Eleanor, what did she do? She always was a bit much, you know, the way she clings to him." No one asked Patrick why he did it. No one questioned the bride. They only judged the woman who was leaving. I reached my old truck, the dented, faithful Ford, parked miles away in the back lot. I fumbled with the key, climbed inside, and locked the doors. Only then, with the safety of metal surrounding me, did I allow the tears to fall. It wasn't just sadness. It was a profound, aching betrayal. The fury of being used and discarded, like an old wine bottle emptied of its worth. I looked in the rearview mirror, a face etched with sun, worry, and sacrifice, her hair a messy halo of gray, her lipstick smeared across her tired mouth. I looked like a woman who had just realized she had invested 35 years of her life in a relationship that was based purely on financial expectation, not loved. I drove back toward Napa, the sunset painting the vineyards in hues of gold and fire, mocking the darkness in my soul. When I finally reached the Sunstone Vineyard, I parked, sat on the porch swing, and watched the vast, peaceful rows of vines. They were my only witnesses. The air smelled of damp earth and fermentation. Inside me, a storm raged. Arthur had left me nothing but Patrick. Had I, in my endless giving, inadvertently turned my son into a hollow man who only valued what I could provide? I sat there all night. When the sun finally rose, casting long shadows across the fields, I was still there, heartbroken, exhausted, but with a terrifying clarity. A woman who built a dynasty from dust does not fall easily. A flicker of resolve, hard and cold, began to burn in the ashes of my disappointment. That morning, the phone rang. It was Patrick. My heart leaped, expecting an apology. "Mom," his voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "I need the deeds to the Sunstone." The coldness in his tone stopped my breath. "Serafina and I are holding a celebratory dinner there this weekend, and then we want to talk about transferring the title. It just doesn't make sense for an old woman like you to keep managing everything." He wasn't calling to apologize. He was calling to demand the very life I had built with my own bleeding hands. "You threw me out of your wedding yesterday," I said, my voice barely a whisper, yet steady as stone. "And today you are demanding the keys to the legacy I spent 35 years creating? Don't be dramatic, Eleanor." Serafina was just stressed. "Now we need to think about the future. You're getting old. You can't handle the 350 acres forever. It's better to transfer it now. If you cooperate, Mom, I only want what's best for you." Then, he hung up. I sat with the phone in my trembling hand. I looked out at the vines, the rolling hills, the silent, golden land. Every inch held a memory, a scar, a victory. Right then, I made a decision. If my son saw me as an obstacle to be removed, then I would show him what a woman who survived a lifetime of hardship could do when she was finally pushed too far. They had 7 days before the celebratory dinner. 7 days to believe they had already won. 7 days for me to set the stage for a spectacular fall. I spent the rest of that day in a daze, though my mind was sharper than it had been in years. The betrayal was no longer a dull ache, it was a driving force. I walked through the rooms of my farmhouse, the worn floorboards, the antique stove, the pencil marks on the pantry door where I had measured Patrick's height every birthday for 20 years. Every corner was a monument to a love that had been brutally dismissed. The photos on the mantel, from Patrick as a chubby-cheeked baby to his proud college graduation, stared back at me like ghosts of a happier, simpler time. The next morning, the call came again. This time, his voice was impatient, the pretense of politeness entirely gone. "Mom, have you thought about it? The vineyard has a valuation of nearly $7 million now. You can't honestly think you can just keep sitting on that much wealth at your age." "Patrick," I began, trying to sound reasonable, "we need to talk in person. There are legal complexities." "There's nothing to talk about. You give me the deeds, or I'll have to do it another way. Another way. The words sent a cold spike of dread through my heart. You're not young anymore, he continued, the arrogance in his tone chilling. A property that size is too much responsibility. Any judge would agree that it makes sense for me to take over. He was threatening me. My own flesh and blood was preparing to launch a legal assault to seize the legacy I had built for him. Are you serious about this? I asked, my voice barely steady. I'm just being practical. If you cooperate, Serafina said she'll let you stay in the old annex. Small, simple, easy to maintain. It's better than being completely alone. The annex. It was a dusty, dilapidated shed, barely 10 feet by 12 feet, where I stored my old pruning tools. He was suggesting I live in a glorified closet on the edge of my own 350 acres. Patrick, this vineyard is mine. I built it from nothing after your father died. I paid off every dollar of debt, year after year. Mom, it will be mine eventually anyway. I'm your only heir. Why not just make it easier now? His tone was sharp, like the glint of a newly sharpened pruning shear. I need until Friday, I replied, buying time. Serafina wants an answer before the celebratory dinner. You have until then. If you say no. The silence that followed was heavy, weighted with menace. Then we'll have to take action. I've already spoken with Serafina's family lawyer, Charles, and he says at your age, getting temporary guardianship wouldn't be hard. Guardianship. The word echoed in the vast, empty rooms of my heart. He was planning to have me declared mentally incompetent, stripping me of every right, every decision, everything I had fought for. You can't do that, I whispered, the disbelief almost paralyzing. I don't want to. But if you force me, Eleanor. He didn't finish the threat. He didn't have to. I hung up, my hands shaking so violently I almost dropped the phone. The room spun. My only son, the one I had fed, educated, and protected with every fiber of my being, was plotting to steal my very identity. I sat down on the old porch swing, the same one where I used to rock him to sleep, singing quiet lullabies after a long day of backbreaking work. I remembered selling my first dozen calves to pay for his school tuition. The sacrifices, the choices, all made to give him more. The memories flashed like a cruel, mocking film reel. I needed help. And not just any help. I needed a lawyer who understood the land, understood the pain, and understood the ruthless politics of wealth in Napa. I drove out that afternoon, not in my battered Ford, but in a small, rented sedan. I didn't want anyone recognizing my old truck. I didn't go to the glossy, high-rise law firms downtown. Instead, I drove to the outskirts of town, to a small, unassuming office above a quiet, local bakery. The door read, Milton and Associates, Land Law. I met Mr. Ethan Milton. He was perhaps 50 years old, quiet, dressed in a simple tweed jacket, with kind but intensely focused eyes. His office was surprisingly small, lined with dusty legal tomes and photos of vineyards. I told him everything, starting from the slap in the ballroom, the whispers, the $95,000 spent on the wedding, and ending with the threat of guardianship. He listened without interrupting, only pausing once to pour me a glass of water. When I finished, the silence was profound. He leaned back in his chair, tapping a pen against a yellow legal pad. Mrs. Vance, he finally said, his voice measured. The documents Serafina's lawyer presented, the $7 million valuation, the living donation agreements, all of it is designed to exploit your maternal instinct and your isolation. But legally, your son has absolutely no right to this land while you are alive. Inheritance only applies after death. Any transfer of title during your lifetime must be completely voluntary. And in this case, you are clearly being coerced. That makes any document they prepare entirely invalid. Relief, sharp and overwhelming, washed over me. So, they can't take the sunstone from me? Not legally, no. But they might still try the guardianship route they mentioned. We need to act fast to protect you from that. He grabbed a fresh pad and began to write, the plan forming rapidly in his mind. I will do 3 things today. First, I will register the Sunstone Vineyard as personal property with a non-transfer clause through the court. This means no one, not even you, unless you petition the court, can sell or gift it. This will immediately block any forced transfer. Second, I will arrange for a private psychologist to officially certify that you are fully competent. We need a document that preemptively destroys their guardianship argument. Third, I will have my private people investigate Serafina and her family lawyer, Charles. In a town like this, I guarantee there's plenty of dirt behind two people who move with such open arrogance. For the first time in weeks, I felt a surge of genuine hope. How much will all this cost, Mr. Milton? I asked quietly. He smiled, a genuine, warm smile. My mother went through something similar when she lost my father. She was told she was too weak to manage his fishing business. I understand. For now, we will simply cover the paperwork and filing fees, around $2,000 total. We'll worry about court costs if it comes to a hearing. I left his office and went straight to the bank. I withdrew the cash and immediately brought it back to him. Mr. Milton made 5 phone calls right there in front of me, setting the entire strategy into motion. I felt a sense of precision and integrity radiating from him that I hadn't felt from anyone in years. That afternoon, I met the psychologist he recommended, Dr. Henry. He was a kind, serious elderly gentleman who put me through a rigorous 2-hour cognitive examination, memory tests, and reasoning tasks. At the end, he signed the report with a flourish. The patient, Eleanor Vance, shows full cognitive capacity, normal memory, and reasoning, and is fully capable of managing all personal and civil affairs. I took the document home, but I did not turn into the ranch immediately. I stopped at an electronics store. I need a complete home security camera system, I told the clerk. How many units would cover the farmhouse, the main gate, the cellars, and the entrances? At least 8 units to cover the entire 350 acres, ma'am. I'll take them. Install them all tonight. I paid $4,000 cash, and the technicians worked until midnight. The living room, the kitchen, the porch, the main gate, all monitored, all recorded, and all backed up online. If Patrick or Serafina came back to threaten me, this time I would have ironclad proof of their coercion. The stage was set. Now, I just had to wait for Mr. Milton's next move. The waiting was the hardest part. Every hour that ticked by was 1 hour closer to Serafina's planned celebratory dinner, the event they clearly intended to use as their final pressure point. I walked the vineyard every morning, touching the deep, cracked bark of the old vines, drawing strength from the roots that had held firm against 35 years of drought, storms, and neglect. The vines were my silent children, they had never betrayed me. Mr. Milton called early on Thursday, his voice carrying an edge of professional excitement. Mrs. Vance, I found something interesting. About Serafina Hayes. Tell me, I said, my heart pounding a rhythm against my ribs. Her full legal name is Serafina Christine Hayes. And she's been legally married since the summer of 2021 to a man named David Reed. The marriage was never legally annulled or dissolved. I froze, the blood in my veins turning to ice. She's already married? And she still married my son? By law, her marriage to Patrick is entirely invalid. This is legally known as bigamy, a serious felony in this state. A criminal, I whispered, the rage finally bubbling up. She abandoned her husband and still married my son? And there's more, Mr. Milton added. She has a 5-year-old daughter with Mr. Reed, currently residing with him in Dallas, Texas. We have a certified copy of the Texas marriage license and the child's birth certificate. Suddenly, the last 3 years of confusion, pain, and betrayal crystallized into a monstrous, terrifying picture. Serafina wasn't just a materialistic gold digger, she was a calculated criminal, an opportunist who had abandoned her own child and husband to ensnare my son and steal my legacy. Does Patrick know about this? I asked, though I already knew the answer. I doubt it. Men in love, or perhaps just men who are desperate for the approval of a beautiful woman, rarely look too deeply. But we can't confront her yet. You need to keep the game going. She and her lawyer must believe they have already won. Stay quiet, let them think you are capitulating, while I gather the ironclad evidence. In 2 days, I'll have everything we need to call the police and file a formal fraud complaint with the district attorney's office. I hung up, shaking. Not with fear, but with a righteous, boiling fury. That venomous woman had poisoned my son's mind, destroyed my peace, humiliated me publicly, and tried to steal everything I owned, all built on a massive, unforgivable deception, but I knew the strategy. I needed to lure the snake into the open before striking. That night, I called Patrick. He answered cautiously, still wary after the wedding confrontation. Mom. I swallowed the bitterness in my throat and forced my voice to be soft, yielding, and tired. Patrick, darling, I've been thinking. You're right. I'm old, and I don't have the energy to keep fighting a family battle. We'll go ahead with the transfer. There was a profound silence on the line, a hesitation born of pure disbelief. You mean it, Mom? You're finally seeing reason? I do, son. But I want it to be done properly. I want it to be a special occasion. Invite everyone this Saturday, you, Serafina, her parents, and Charles. I want to sign the papers in front of everyone. I want this to be a reconciliation, not a messy argument. His voice suddenly filled with a sickening relief, a triumphant glee. I knew it, Mom. You won't regret this. You'll see, everything is going to be so much better now. Serafina and I will take such good care of you. I trust you, son, I lied, the words tasting like ash. 10 a.m. I'll have a celebratory breakfast ready for everyone. Fresh baked scones, strong coffee, and the best preserves. Perfect. I'll tell Serafina right away. When the call ended, a slow, cold smile stretched across my lips. They thought they were about to win the whole vineyard, but they didn't know they had just stepped fully into my trap. I had 2 days to finish my preparations, 48 hours to prepare the final, devastating blow. Because real revenge isn't about screaming or crying. It's about waiting patiently for the perfect moment and striking with surgical precision when the enemy least expects it. The next day, Friday, I focused entirely on setting the stage. I cleaned the farmhouse meticulously, polishing the old oak table until it gleamed. I baked the scones and brewed the preserves, the aroma filling the house with a deceptive warmth. Then, I met with Mr. Milton one last time. He handed me a simple, black briefcase. Inside, he explained, you have 3 folders. Folder 1 contains the certified marriage documents and the child's birth certificate. Folder 2 contains copies of the initial restraining order application against Serafina and Charles for documented coercion, based on your camera recordings of their previous visit, and the affidavit from the certified psychologist. And Folder 3 contains a detailed, itemized record of every loan, every payment, and every expensive gift you have ever given Patrick, from the $40,000 tuition to the $38,000 truck, all of which constitutes a significant debt. I don't need the debt folder, I said, shaking my head. I just want the truth to be exposed. Trust me, Mrs. Vance, you will need the full picture to deliver the final lesson. And one more thing, I have arranged a small surprise. 2 of my best people will be stationed discreetly near the vineyard gate. They are not to interfere unless your personal safety is at risk, but they will be ready. And I have also notified the local sheriff's department. Detective Marcus is on standby at the station. He will arrive exactly 15 minutes after I call him to verify the evidence. You will be safe. I thanked him, the gratitude deep and real. I drove home, the black briefcase sitting on the passenger seat, feeling the weight of the coming storm. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened a bottle of my favorite wine, a 2019 Cabernet Sauvignon, and poured a small glass. I walked out onto the porch, watched the last rays of sun hit the rows of vines, and raised the glass. To Arthur, I whispered. And to Eleanor Vance. We survived. I was not just a grieving mother anymore. I was an architect of vengeance, a woman finally ready to protect her own dignity. As the clock ticked toward the 10 a.m. meeting, I felt the adrenaline surge. This wasn't about the $7 million vineyard anymore. This was about a mother's soul, a final, desperate attempt to save her son from the life of entitlement and delusion that she had, ironically, helped create. The only way to save him was to tear his false world apart. And tomorrow, I would pull the first thread. Saturday morning broke clear and bright, a false promise of peace. I woke before 5 a.m., my heart hammering a chaotic rhythm. I made a strong pot of French press coffee, the rich, earthy scent a grounding force in the storm of my nerves. I set the long oak table with my best china, the one I had kept locked away for 30 years, only used for Patrick's biggest milestones, graduations, birthdays, and now, ironically, his final confrontation. Mr. Milton arrived briefly around 8 a.m., parking his vehicle far down the dirt road so it wouldn't be seen. He connected his laptop discreetly to the 60-inch television in the living room, testing the files. He confirmed that the 8 security cameras were all recording and the feeds were backed up on 3 separate cloud servers. "Are you absolutely sure about this, Eleanor?" he asked, his eyes grave. "This is going to be harsh. They will be humiliated, perhaps even arrested, right here in your home." "I am sure," I said, my voice cold and firm. "They humiliated me in public at his wedding, Mr. Milton. Now, it is their turn to face the truth in private. And perhaps only by seeing the full extent of the deception, will Patrick finally realize the rot that has consumed his life." He nodded, gave me a final reassuring glance, and slipped back out, leaving the black briefcase resting on the table. Around 9:45 a.m., the sound of luxury engines crunched the gravel driveway. First came Patrick's shiny, new $38,000 silver pickup, the one I had bought him. Serafina emerged first, stunning in a fitted, crimson dress, her high heels clicking arrogantly on the old porch. She carried a bottle of expensive champagne, a triumphant, sickening smirk plastered on her face. "Hello, Eleanor," she chirped, walking straight into the house without a greeting, acting as if she already owned the place. "I brought Veuve Clicquot to celebrate. I knew you'd see sense eventually." Patrick followed, beaming, a look of immense relief and greed washing over his features. "Mom. I told Serafina you're a great woman. You'll see, everything's going to be so much better now that we're working together." Next came Serafina's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Hayes, Ronald and Patricia, looking uncomfortable and overdressed. Ronald, a man whose clothes clearly cost more than my entire year's clothing budget, gave me a weak, uncertain smile. Finally, Charles Moore, the family lawyer, arrived, impeccably dressed, carrying his leather briefcase, his face set in that same arrogant, predatory smirk. They all gathered in the living room. Serafina immediately began pouring the champagne, her voice dripping with artificial satisfaction. "To a new beginning." Eleanor finally realized that family comes first, and that resting is the best decision for a woman of 72 years. Charles opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of papers. "Mrs. Vance, everything is ready. The living donation agreement. Very simple. Just 3 signatures, quick and easy, to transfer 70% of the vineyard assets to your son and his wife." I took the file and pretended to read the fine print, the words blurring before my eyes. Serafina tapped her fingernails impatiently on her glass. Patrick smiled widely, leaning back in his chair like the new master of the house. I lifted my head, my eyes meeting Patrick's, and then Serafina's. "Before I sign," I said, my voice soft but commanding, "I would like to say something." "Mom, there's no need for speeches," Patrick interrupted, waving his hand dismissively. I raised my hand, cutting him off. "Yes, there is. Because this moment matters." I took a deep breath, letting the gravity of the past 35 years settle in the room. "It took me 35 years to build the Sunstone Vineyard," I began, my voice steady, gaining power. "I was 37, widowed, 6 months pregnant, and buried in debt. Everyone told me I would fail, that a woman couldn't run a vineyard, but I refused to quit. I worked 2 jobs for 5 long years, paid off $200,000 in debt, and built this legacy, every vine, every cellar, every acre, with my own hands and sweat." Charles tried to interject, "Mrs. Vance, I understand the sentiment, but the legalities." "I'm not finished," I cut him off sharply. I raised my son with everything I had. I sold my best harvests to pay his $40,000 tuition, bought him a $38,000 truck, and spent nearly $100,000 on this wedding. And this, I said, my voice rising, my finger pointing at the transfer papers, is how you repay a lifetime of sacrifice? By plotting to lock me in a storage room and threatening to have me declared mentally incompetent? The room froze. Patrick's face flushed scarlet, the shame of physical force. Mom, you're exaggerating. Serafina was just stressed about the wedding expenses. Am I? I picked up the remote control and pressed a single, devastating button. Then listen. The 60-inch television immediately came to life, filling the room with the grainy, yet crystal clear, audio from the hidden kitchen camera. Serafina's voice, cold and mocking, filled the sudden, suffocating silence. Charles, that stupid old woman is never going to sign. We'll have to force her. How long until the guardianship goes through? Charles's oily voice followed, about 2 months. With the 3 witnesses I've arranged saying she's confused, it'll be easy. Then we sell the land quick and split the $7 million profit. Serafina's laughter, a sharp, hateful sound, came next. Perfect. I'll tear down that dump of a farmhouse and build something worthy of a $7 million property. Something modern and grand. The sound died. The room was deathly silent. Serafina's face had gone the color of porcelain. Charles jumped violently to his feet, reaching for his briefcase. That's an illegal recording, he shouted, his voice cracking. That's inadmissible evidence. Sit down, Charles, I said, my voice like steel, and surprisingly, he obeyed. There is so much more to see. I pressed the button again. The screen shifted, displaying a formal legal document, complete with stamps and official seals. Her full name, Serafina Christine Hayes, was displayed in bold letters. Marriage certificate. Legally married since July 15, 2021 to David Reed, issued in the state of Texas. Patrick turned to Serafina, his face ghostly white. What is this? What is she talking about? Serafina stammered, her composure finally shattered. It's fake. I cut her off by switching to the next image, Serafina, smiling broadly in a photo with a man and a little girl. The caption beneath read, daughter, Isabella Reed, age 5. The room exploded into chaos. Patrick leaped out of his chair, his hands shaking. You have a husband? You have a child? Our marriage isn't even legal. Serafina reached for him, but he pulled away as if she were a viper. Patricia, Serafina's mother, burst into tears, looking at her daughter with sheer horror. She deceived everyone, I stated, my voice ringing with finality. She married my son under false pretenses to steal his future inheritance. Mr. Milton found 2 similar cases in other states. She targets wealthy heirs, marries them, and drains them. She is a criminal, Serafina is a criminal, and she belongs in jail. Ronald, Serafina's father, was crimson with fury and shame. Mrs. Vance, I swear, we didn't know anything about this. We're victims, too. I believe you, I said softly, looking at the stunned couple. You raised a daughter. I raised a son. And both of us were blind. Charles Moore, the lawyer, seeing his entire operation collapse, tried to salvage the situation. He attempted to back away toward the front door, but a tall, formidable figure stepped out from the kitchen, blocking the doorway. It was one of Mr. Milton's associates, a man with the calm, steady posture of a professional security guard. Going somewhere, Charles? Mr. Milton's associate said quietly. Before you try to flee, please know that Mr. Milton has already filed a formal complaint with the State Bar Association. Coercing the elderly, falsifying witness statements, conspiracy to commit fraud, your license will not last the week. You are finished. Charles's face turned the color of ash. He sank back onto the sofa, defeated. Patrick, his world utterly shattered, sank into the nearest chair, clutching his head with both hands. Mom, his voice was a broken whisper, I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know she had a husband. Didn't know, or didn't want to know? I asked, staring directly into his raw, red eyes. You chose to believe a beautiful stranger over the mother who gave you everything. You chose her flattery over my love. Serafina finally snapped. Fine. Yes, I did it. But do you know why? Because people like you have everything handed to them. Sitting on a $7 million vineyard while others struggle to survive. You're selfish and greedy. Handed to me? My voice dropped low, the steel returning. I bled for everything I have. You, on the other hand, steal. I threw Mr. Milton's final folder, folder 3, onto the polished oak table with a resounding thud. Here is all the evidence, I announced to the room. Bigamy, fraud, and conspiracy. Copies are already with the Napa County Sheriff's Department. There is an investigator waiting at the station for your formal statement, Serafina. She went utterly white. You can't do that. Not only can I already did. Seeing the raw fear in her eyes and the crushing shame on my son's face, I felt a deep, almost painful sense of control. It wasn't the joy of victory, it was the quiet, cold satisfaction of justice served, but the lesson was not yet complete for Patrick. I picked up the last stack of documents from the folder, speaking slowly and deliberately. And one more thing. Patrick, you have borrowed money from me 17 times over the past 3 years. Loans, gifts, and payments that total nearly $300,000, money that came directly from the vineyard's operating budget. He looked up, tears streaming down his face. Mom, I was going to pay you back. As soon as I took over the management. How? I countered, holding up the bank statements. You haven't held a steady job in 4 years. Where did it all go? I began reading the ledger aloud, item by shocking item, online sports betting and gambling, $78,000. Jewelry and designer clothes for Serafina, $82,000. Luxury vacations to the Caribbean and Europe, $45,000. Apartment renovations and rent for the past 2 years, $67,000. And that startup business venture you said you were launching with the final $20,000? Mr. Milton confirmed no such company was ever registered. Ronald and Patricia, Serafina's parents, buried their heads in their hands. They were witnessing the brutal reality of the daughter they had raised. I looked at Serafina, my voice cold as the ice in the champagne glass she had abandoned. And worst of all, Serafina, Mr. Milton uncovered your messages on a dark web criminal forum. You were already planning your next scam, flirting with another target, a wealthy widower in Oklahoma. You weren't just using Patrick, you were planning to use him and then dump him the moment you gained access to the vineyard's capital. Patrick turned toward her, speechless, the final, agonizing piece of the puzzle locking into place. You were going to leave me? Serafina sneered, her mask completely gone. Of course. You think I'd stay with a pathetic loser like you? I only used you to get closer to your mother's money. I just didn't expect her to be sharper than she looks, or to have a lawyer who actually does his job. The room went completely still. Patrick stumbled back, leaning heavily against the wall like a man utterly crushed by the weight of his own profound foolishness. Charles, ever the opportunist, tried one last time to settle. Mrs. Vance, we can still settle this quietly. No need to involve the police. We can refund the $2,000 and leave immediately. Too late, I said, a faint roar of engines now audible in the distance. Detective Marcus and 2 officers are on their way. Mr. Milton just confirmed they will be here in 5 minutes. Serafina let out a visceral scream, knocking over her champagne glass, which shattered loudly on the old oak floor, the shards glittering like a million broken promises. You bitter, selfish, old woman. No one can stand you. I met her eyes, my gaze unflinching. I'd rather be alone with dignity than surrounded by snakes like you. She lunged forward, her rage finally overwhelming her. Mr. Milton's associate immediately stepped in front of me, a wall of quiet defense. Do you really want to add assault to your list of charges, ma'am? He asked calmly. She froze, shaking violently, then turned to her parents. Let's go, Dad. But Ronald stood frozen, staring at his criminal daughter in pure despair. Serafina, what happened to you? We didn't raise you like this. You raised me in poverty, in that pathetic little house. I deserve better, she shrieked. Patricia began to weep uncontrollably. We gave you love, education, and values. If you chose the wrong path, don't blame your parents. For the first time that morning, I felt a flicker of pity for the Hayes couple. They were victims, too, betrayed by their own blood. Engines roared outside, and I looked through the window. 2 police cruisers were pulling up to the gate. Detective Marcus, a serious man I recognized from the local news, entered with 2 uniformed officers. Mrs. Vance, the detective said, his voice professional and direct. We've received all the documentation from Mr. Milton. We'll need you and the witnesses at the station to complete the formal report. Serafina tried to slip out the side door, but one of the officers immediately blocked her path. Ma'am, please cooperate. It'll be easier for everyone. Serafina looked around the room, the realization of her absolute defeat finally setting in. I haven't done anything illegal. Marriage is a personal matter. Bigamy is a felony, ma'am, the detective replied firmly, as are fraud and falsifying information to obtain assets. Mr. Moore, you'll need to come as well. Coercing an elderly client with false documents is a crime. As the police led Serafina and Charles away in handcuffs, Ronald and Patricia approached me. Mrs. Vance, Ronald said, his voice thick with shame. We don't know how to apologize for this humiliation. I gently took Patricia's hand. No one ever imagines their child could become someone like that. I understand. Go home, and focus on healing your own family. They left, their heads bowed low in deep, profound shame. Only Patrick and I remained in the silent room, the air thick with the residue of their exposure. He leaned against the wall, looking 10 years older than he had just an hour ago. Mom, Patrick's voice finally broke, a jagged sound in the sudden silence. I'm sorry. I really didn't know any of it. No, I corrected him softly, walking to the shattered champagne glass on the floor. You didn't want to know. I tried to warn you, but you chose to believe a woman who told you what you wanted to hear, that you deserved everything without effort. I was blind, Mom. She made me feel important. She made me feel like I finally mattered. I looked straight into his wounded eyes, the eyes of the little boy I used to hold on this very porch. Patrick, you have always mattered. But instead of recognizing your worth through the mother who built a life for you, you needed a manipulator to tell you that you were a prince entitled to a $7 million kingdom. He slid slowly down the wall until he was sitting on the floor, hugging his knees, looking utterly lost. Part of me, the old, desperate to nurture mother, wanted to go to him, to hold him, to tell him everything would be okay. But the other part, the part that was hurt, humiliated, and utterly betrayed, held firm. The lesson had to be learned alone. You want to know what to do now? I asked, my voice measured. Learn. Grow up. Stop waiting for someone to hand you anything. Get a real job. Pay back your debts. Be a man of substance, not of entitlement. And you, he asked quietly, looking up at me, his eyes red and swollen. Will you ever forgive me? I looked at him, then out the window, where the sunlight poured over the wide, perfect rows of Cabernet Sauvignon vines I had built with my own hands. I don't know, Patrick, I said honestly. I really don't. One thing I knew for certain, nothing would ever be the same again. Get up, I commanded, turning away from him to clear the shattered glass. He struggled to his feet, wiping his tears with the back of his hand. When you called me that day, demanding the vineyard deeds, do you know how I felt? I turned back to face him. I felt like I had lost my only son. The boy I once held and protected was gone, replaced by a stranger driven by pure, naked greed. Mom, Serafina manipulated me. She controlled me. No, I cut him off, my voice sharp as the shattered glass. She could manipulate you, but you chose to believe her. You chose to humiliate me on your wedding day. You chose to bring a predatory lawyer into my home and threaten me with the loss of my rights. Do not blame her for everything. You are 37 years old. Take responsibility for your own profound choices." He bowed his head, defeated, accepting the truth. "Do you know how many times I almost gave up?" I continued, the memory of my struggles fueling my final decision. "When I was widowed, pregnant, penniless, facing $200,000 in debt, but I kept going because I promised you would have a better life. Everything I did was for you." "I know, Mom. I'm sorry." Let me finish. I walked to the table and opened the file again, the documents Mr. Milton had prepared yesterday. "I've thought a lot about what to do with the sunstone," I said slowly. "And I've made my decision. I signed new papers yesterday. The Sunstone Vineyard is no longer just my private property. It is now registered as a community agricultural trust." Patrick's eyes widened in profound shock, the last remnants of hope draining from his face. 40% of the Sunstone's annual net profit," I continued, "will be dedicated to social projects named after your father, Arthur Vance. We will create a scholarship fund for underprivileged children in Napa Valley, a support program for young widows facing debt, and a food supply initiative for struggling farm families. And the other 60%, I concluded, will be used to support my own humble living expenses until I pass away. After that, everything, the land, the winery, the remaining capital, will be donated, in its entirety, to local charities, daycare centers, nursing homes, and public schools." "Mom," he asked, his voice trembling in utter disbelief, are you disinheriting me?" "No," I said calmly, looking at the man who was once my world. "You disinherited yourself when you started seeing me as an obstacle instead of your mother. When you chose entitlement over gratitude, you removed yourself from this legacy." Patrick collapsed back onto the chair, gripping the armrests tightly. "Mom, please don't do this. I'm begging you. I'll change. I'll work here. Just please, don't take it all away." "This isn't revenge, Patrick," I said, leaning in. "This is justice and a lesson I should have taught you 20 years ago. The world does not owe you anything. You have no right to claim the results of someone else's hard work, not even your mother's." Tears streamed down his face, genuine, remorseful tears. "I've lost everything." "No," I shook my head gently. "You've only lost the material things that were never actually yours to begin with. But you can still regain something far more valuable: character, self-respect, and dignity. This is your chance to build something that truly belongs to you." At that moment, Mr. Milton's associate stepped back into the room. "Mrs. Vance, I have to go now, but I've left all the copies. Everything is legally registered. No one, not even Patrick, can contest this decision anymore. Your legacy is secure." "Thank you for everything," I said, shaking his hand, the gratitude immense. He smiled kindly and left, leaving Patrick and me alone in the messy room, surrounded by the remnants of the disaster. "Mom, what do I do now?" Patrick asked, his voice weak and full of despair, like a ship stranded after a tidal wave. I sat down in the chair opposite him, feeling the immense weight of my 72 years pressing down on my shoulders. The air was thick with the scent of coffee and the lingering bitterness of exposed lies. "You will do what anyone who has made such profound mistakes must do," I said, meeting his defeated gaze. "You start over. You find a job. You rebuild your life. You learn how to have worth without relying on someone else's assets. And you? Will you help me?" The question, raw and honest, pierced my heart with a pain far greater than the initial betrayal. "I will give you something I never gave you before," I replied. "Freedom. Freedom to fall, to rise again, to learn self-reliance. I will not pay your debts. I will not fund your expenses. You have 2 hands and a sharp mind. You will start with the same nothing I had when I was widowed and penniless 35 years ago." "But I'm your son," he protested, the plea of the spoiled child still clinging to his voice. "Exactly," I affirmed. "And because you are my son, you deserve the chance to prove your own worth. Not to me, but to yourself. If you don't earn it now, you will be a man without a soul for the rest of your life." He sat there silently for a long moment, processing the cold, hard truth of my words. Then, he slowly nodded. "Can I still visit you sometimes?" he asked, the vulnerability in his eyes genuine for the first time in years. I looked at my grown son, seeing a faint flicker of the sweet boy I remembered. "When you come not to ask for something," I said, "when you come as a man, not a child seeking shelter, then I will be ready to talk." He stood up, hesitated at the door, and turned back. "Mom, I'm really sorry for everything. I mean it." I didn't speak. I simply gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. He left, and I stood alone in the room, surrounded by broken glasses and scattered legal papers, the battlefield remains of a morning that had revealed every painful truth. But for the first time in many weeks, I took a deep breath, and I felt a sense of profound, quiet peace. The months that followed took my life in an entirely new and unexpected direction. Serafina was arrested and ultimately sentenced to 2.5 years in federal prison for bigamy, fraud, and conspiracy. Charles Moore was disbarred and is now facing civil lawsuits. Ronald and Patricia, Serafina's parents, came to visit me several times. They were heartbroken, but honest. We shared coffee, and I listened as they recounted their own struggles, how they had tried to raise Serafina with good values only to see her embrace greed. We are now distant, quiet friends, connected by the strange, painful bond of having been victims of the same ruthless individual. 3 months after the confrontation, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Patrick. He wrote that he was renting a small, shared room in the city, working as a sales clerk at a local hardware store, earning roughly $2,000 a month. He confessed that he was attending therapy and, for the first time in his life, was paying his own bills. He admitted how terrifying, yet liberating, it was to stand on his own 2 feet. I didn't reply, but I kept the letter. It was the first honest communication I had received from him in nearly 5 years. Now, 6 months after that devastating Saturday morning, I still wake up before 6 a.m., make my coffee, and go tend the land. The Community Agricultural Trust is flourishing. The charity projects, named the Arthur Vance Foundation, have helped 50 struggling farm families, renovated 1 local school, and provided over 300 food boxes to the community. I recently planted a new row of bright, tall sunflowers along the main vineyard gate. They stand tall, golden, and proud under the hot California sun. Every morning, when I walk past them, I remember the 4 most important words I said to Patrick that day, the words that closed one chapter of my life and opened a new, brighter one. You are not entitled. Simple, clear, and true. Sometimes, the greatest act of a mother's love is pulling back the rug that her child has been standing on. It's teaching them that respect can't be bought, inherited, or stolen. It must be earned. Yesterday, Patrick came by unexpectedly. He didn't drive the silver pickup, he took the bus. He brought a small bouquet of wildflowers he bought from a roadside stand, not the expensive, professionally arranged kind Serafina favored, but humble, real flowers. He said nothing, and just sat with me on the porch swing, watching the sunset paint the vineyard rose and violet and gold. I don't know if we will ever fully mend our relationship. Maybe we will, maybe we won't. But I do know that for the first time in many years, he understands the real value of life, and I understand the real value of my own peace. My true wealth isn't in what I own, it's in what no one can take away. The greatest inheritance I could ever leave isn't the land or the money. It is the lesson that dignity is worth more than any fortune. The transformation of the Sunstone Vineyard from a personal holding into a community trust brought a refreshing, clean energy to the entire property. I hired 3 new vineyard managers, bright, dedicated young women who had studied viticulture with a focus on sustainable practices, the kind of passion Patrick had never possessed. We started a new initiative, planting cover crops and introducing organic methods across 100 acres. The work was tireless, but the feeling of purpose was invigorating. My days were no longer consumed by anxiety over inheritance, they were filled with the satisfaction of building a sustainable future. The local community rallied around the Arthur Vance Foundation. The scholarship fund received 20 applications in the first 3 months, and we were able to award 5 full-ride scholarships to students whose parents were vineyard workers, children who might never have had the chance to attend college otherwise. This was the true legacy of the Sunstone, a reflection of the hard work I had put in, now magnified to help the wider world. It was a fulfillment I realized I had been craving for 20 years, a purpose beyond simply providing for my son. I also took steps to heal myself. I started meeting with Dr. Henry, the psychologist, not for a competency assessment, but for personal counseling. I needed to understand why I had allowed myself to be manipulated by my own son for so long. Eleanor, Dr. Henry explained gently during one of our sessions, you didn't just give Patrick money, you gave him every opportunity you were denied. You tried to buy him immunity from the hardship that defined you. But in doing so, you robbed him of the opportunity to build his own self-worth. You were a magnificent survivor, and you forgot that he needed to become one, too. His words struck a deep, profound chord. My endless giving had not been an act of pure, selfless love, it had been a protective shield that turned into a gilded cage for both of us. It was a silent admission that my struggles were too ugly for him to experience. By shielding him from hardship, I had crippled his character. But what about forgiveness? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I feel so much anger, Dr. Henry. I built this entire life for him, and his only response was a demand for more and a threat to put me away. Forgiveness is not a single, dramatic event, Eleanor, he replied, adjusting his glasses. It's a process. You don't forgive him for what he did to you, you forgive him for what he did to himself. And most importantly, you must forgive yourself for believing that your worth as a mother was tied to his success or gratitude. Your worth is inherent, Eleanor. It's in the hands that built the sunstone, not the son who tried to take it. I began to practice self-forgiveness. I started wearing clothes that were new, bright, and comfortable, discarding the old, worn outfits I had clung to as symbols of my sacrifice. I sold the battered 2008 Ford pickup and bought a small, sturdy, 2024 SUV, a comfortable vehicle for a woman who deserved to drive in peace. I even splurged on a short trip to the Oregon coast, the first real vacation I had taken in 35 years. During that trip, I didn't think about Patrick, the vineyard, or the court battle. I walked the sandy beaches, collected seashells, and let the salty air cleanse the deep exhaustion from my soul. When I returned, I felt lighter, stronger, and more centered. I was no longer defined by my victimhood, I was defined by my recovery. Patrick, meanwhile, continued his slow, painful ascent. His letters came more frequently, small updates, never demands. He wrote about the difficulty of earning a living wage, the exhaustion of working 8 hours a day on his feet, and the humbling experience of having to apologize to his old college friends for his past arrogance. He even mentioned reading a book on financial literacy. One afternoon, he showed up at the vineyard unannounced. He was wearing clothes that looked slightly too big for him, a testament to his weight loss and the stress of his new life. I need to borrow some equipment, Mom, he said, avoiding my eyes. My heart immediately tightened. I remembered the old Patrick, the one who always showed up with a demand, a need, a cost. What do you need, Patrick? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. He finally looked up, a faint blush creeping across his cheeks. Not money. I need the old wheelbarrow. My landlord is making me clear the yard, and I don't have a car to haul anything. The old wheelbarrow, I repeated, a small, involuntary smile touching my lips. The old wheelbarrow, covered in rust and dented from 30 years of use, was perhaps the only item on the property that had zero monetary value. It's in the annex, I told him. You can take it. He didn't rush. He walked slowly, retrieved the wheelbarrow, and returned it 2 hours later, even pausing to wipe the dusty handles down with a damp cloth. Thanks, Mom, he said simply. I'll see you next time. That visit, without a single request for money, without a single mention of the vineyard's value, spoke volumes. It was the first sign that the old entitlement had been replaced by a quiet, genuine humility. The seed of true change had finally been planted. And as a woman who knew a thing or two about growing something from nothing, I knew I had to nurture that tiny, fragile sprout of character. My relationship with Patrick entered a long, complex phase of cautious coexistence. He continued to visit, always on Sunday afternoons, always unannounced, and always brief. He never stayed for dinner. We would sit on the porch swing, The same swing where I had cried tears of rage and humiliation, and talk about the weather, the local baseball team, or his grueling work at the hardware store. He was slowly learning the value of small things. He told me about an older colleague who was teaching him how to fix broken pipes and wire simple circuits, skills his Ivy League education had never provided. "I'm earning 1,000 times less, Mom," he admitted one afternoon, "but I've never felt so capable. I can actually do something now." "That's the true measure of a man, Patrick," I responded. "Not what you inherit, but what you can create with your own 2 hands." His life, though financially stark, was finally building a foundation of integrity. My life, though profoundly peaceful, faced a new internal test, the test of true, unconditional love versus lingering resentment. I needed one final action, one last piece of the puzzle, to truly free myself and Patrick from the past. I realized that while I had forgiven myself and I had set the foundation for his change, I had not yet given him a chance to earn back a portion of my trust. The opportunity arose during the late summer harvest season. The Sunstone Vineyard was preparing for its most crucial day, the annual pick day for the boutique, award-winning Cabernet Franc, a day that always required 200 temporary workers and meticulous organization. 3 days before the scheduled pick day, our head foreman, a reliable man named Ricardo, called me in a panic. "Mrs. Vance, I have terrible news. A bus accident on the highway. Nearly 100 of our scheduled pickers from the neighboring county are injured or stranded. We've lost half our crew. If we don't pick the Cabernet Franc in the next 48 hours, the sudden heat wave will ruin the grapes. We will lose nearly $200,000 worth of wine." Panic seized me. Losing the Cabernet Franc would be a major blow to the foundation's budget. I immediately called every local connection, but everyone was already committed. It was a crisis. I found myself dialing Patrick's number. It was the first time I had called him in 6 months. "Patrick, I need you," I said, my voice betraying the stress. "I need you to organize a crew. We need 100 people to pick the Cabernet Franc by tomorrow evening. I don't care where you find them. Call your old friends, call your colleagues, call the students at your old school. I can pay them $20 an hour, cash. But you have to manage them, and you have to make sure the job gets done. This is not for me, Patrick. This is for the Foundation's scholarship fund." There was a long silence on the line. I could almost hear the old entitlement battling the new man. "You're giving me the single most critical task of the year," he asked, his voice tight. "I am giving you a chance to prove what you're worth, Patrick. Not what you inherit, but what you can earn." "I'll do it, Mom," he said, his voice now firm, resolute. "I'll find your crew. And I'll be there myself." He hung up, and the game began. I spent the next 24 hours worrying. I prepared the cellars, the press, and the crates, but the biggest variable was Patrick. At 5 a.m. the next morning, as the sun rose, I stood at the vineyard gate. My heart sank. There was no giant bus, no professionally organized crew. Just Patrick's small, battered car, and behind it, a disorganized trickle of perhaps 20 people, a few of his colleagues from the hardware store, 2 students he knew, and a handful of older, slightly bewildered neighbors he had convinced. "Mom, it's the best I could do on such short notice," he said, clearly exhausted but determined. "But we have a plan. We need 100 people, Patrick." "We don't have time for 100 people, Mom. But we have technology." I called every one of my old fraternity brothers, the ones who run logistics and IT firms. They've created a custom app for me overnight. It shows the optimal picking route, monitors the temperature of the grapes in real time using drone surveillance, and calculates the exact capacity of each crew member, ensuring we don't overfill the crates. It's small, but we're smart. I watched him work. He didn't stand around ordering people, he worked alongside them. He took the hardest, most brutal job, lifting the full, heavy crates, his back aching, his face dripping with sweat, but his eyes focused. He used the problem-solving skills he learned at his Ivy League school, not to find ways to spend money, but to efficiently save the crop. He was working not for himself, but for a cause, the foundation, they worked nonstop for 18 grueling hours. I brought them food, water, and encouragement. Patrick refused to stop. He was a different man, humble, focused, and utterly dedicated. He earned the respect of every single person in that small, desperate crew. At 11 p.m., the last crate was pressed. The entire crop was saved, and the quality was superb. We stood there, side by side, covered in the sticky residue of the crushed grapes, exhausted but triumphant. "We did it, Mom," he whispered, a genuine, earned sense of accomplishment shining in his eyes. "No," I corrected him, a tear finally tracing a line through the dust on my cheek. "You did it, Patrick. You earned this victory." It was the first time I had called him by his name, without any resentment or pain, in over 1 year. He had finally passed the ultimate test. He didn't need the vineyard, he needed to be capable of saving it. The successful harvest of the Cabernet Franc felt like the true closing of the old chapter. The crisis had forced Patrick to shed the last vestiges of his entitled self, revealing the capable, determined man he could be. I watched him settle the payments with his crew. Every person received their $20 per hour in cash, and he even bought them all pizzas using his own money. He was finally learning the honor of keeping a promise and the quiet pride of ethical labor. The following Sunday, Patrick came for his usual visit. He didn't bring the cheap wildflowers, he brought a neatly framed photograph. It was an old photo of him, perhaps 7 years old, covered in dirt, sitting on the porch swing, holding a tiny, bruised grape he had picked off the ground. "I found this when I was packing up my old storage box," he said, handing it to me. "I realized something, Mom. I was never happy when I was spending your money. I was happy when I was around you, even when you were covered in dirt and my life was simple. I didn't want the $7 million vineyard, Mom. I just wanted my mother." Tears streamed down my face, the first tears of genuine, unadulterated emotion I had shed in over a year. The bitterness was finally gone, replaced by a profound, healing love. "I forgive you, Patrick," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I forgive you for every word, every threat, and every dollar you wasted. But you must promise me one thing, never stop earning your worth." He didn't speak. He just hugged me, a long, genuine, desperate embrace that felt like 37 years of love and pain all wrapped up together. It was the hug of a child who had finally found his way home. 6 months later, Patrick was no longer working at the hardware store. He had used the logistics app he created for the harvest to launch his own small, consulting firm, Vance Logistics. He helps small, local farms and wineries streamline their operations, using technology to cut down on waste and cost. He is building his own business, brick by brick, one small contract at a time. He is humble, successful, and most importantly, happy. He started paying me back a small portion of his debt, $100 every month, a symbolic gesture of his changed character. I accept it, not because I need the money, but because he needs to give it. The healing between us was complete. It wasn't the fairy tale reconciliation I might have dreamed of when he was a boy, but it was real, forged in the painful fire of honesty and hard-won self-respect. The forgiveness also extended to Serafina's parents, Ronald and Patricia. They continued to visit me, sometimes bringing a homemade pie, always expressing their profound sorrow. I learned that they were selling their humble home to move closer to their 5-year-old granddaughter, Isabella, in Texas, determined to give the child the unconditional love Serafina had denied her. "We want to start over, Eleanor," Patricia confessed one afternoon. "We want to show Isabella what real family means." "Do it," I encouraged her. "The greatest inheritance you can give her is a strong moral compass." My life now had a rhythm of purpose and peace. I still drove the vineyard roads, but now I saw the vines not as a burden, but as a living symbol of my own resilience and a promise to the future. I had built a legacy that would continue long after I was gone, a legacy of education, support, and community, a legacy that no single person could ever exploit. The final piece of advice I gave Patrick was the one that resonated most deeply. One evening, as we sat watching the sunset, he asked me, "Mom, I'm trying to teach my first employee about integrity. What's the one thing I should tell him?" I looked out at the rolling hills, the golden light catching the newly planted sunflowers. "Tell him this, Patrick," I said. "Tell him that a man's biggest failure is not losing money, but losing his dignity. Once you let someone, or something, convince you that you are entitled to take what you haven't earned, you surrender your soul." The Sunstone Vineyard was almost stolen, not by Serafina's greed, but by your own entitlement. Never forget that the real battle is always fought within. Earn your worth every single day. That is the only wealth that lasts. He nodded, absorbing the final, crucial lesson. He was ready. I realized that my initial decision to disinherit him, a decision born of pain and righteous fury, had evolved into the most loving act of my life. By taking away the inheritance, I gave him his true self. And in giving him his self, I finally received my son back. The greatest inheritance was the gift of his renewed character, the successful transformation of the Sunstone Vineyard, and the subsequent healing of my relationship with Patrick did not go unnoticed. The local newspaper, the Napa Valley Chronicle, ran a feature story on the Arthur Vance Foundation. The headline read, "From Family Feud to Community Fortune, How One Woman Turned Betrayal into a Billion-Dollar Legacy of Hope." The article, though exaggerating the financial figure, the vineyard was worth $7 million, not $1 billion, accurately captured the spirit of my journey. The focus was on the strength of character, not the value of the land. This new recognition, however, brought a new set of challenges, though minor compared to Serafina's scheme. Local charities, seeing the foundation's success, began flooding my mailbox with requests for large donations. I had to learn to manage this attention with the same careful integrity I had applied to my legal battle. I established a new rule: every dollar spent had to directly benefit the community, not just a flashy headline. Patrick, now a seasoned businessman, stepped in to help. "Mom," he explained, "we need to manage the foundation like a business, with clear metrics. We need a proper board, a financial audit, and a mission statement that can't be swayed by emotion." We worked together, side by side, drafting the official charter for the Arthur Vance Foundation. It was the best kind of work, collaborative, respectful, and focused on a greater good. He used his Ivy League training for its intended purpose, creating systems and efficiencies that maximized the foundation's impact. I provided the moral compass, ensuring the heart of the foundation remained focused on the struggles of the working-class families I knew so well. One day, while reviewing the foundation's bylaws, Patrick paused. "Mom, there's a loophole here. Technically, because you have lifetime usage rights and are the sole director, you could change the foundation's charter and grant yourself a huge salary." I looked at him, waiting for the test. He smiled, a genuine, earned smile. "We need to close that. We need to cap your director's salary at a reasonable figure, say, $100,000, so no future director can exploit it." I felt a surge of overwhelming pride. The old Patrick would have been exploiting the loophole, the new Patrick was closing it, protecting the legacy from the very temptation that had once consumed him. "You're right, son," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Close the loophole. And make my salary a symbolic $1 per year. I don't need the money. My worth is not in the salary." He laughed, a joyful, clear sound I hadn't heard since his childhood. "You're still the toughest woman in Napa, Mom. $1 it is." I realized that my decision to keep the foundation charter open-ended had been an unconscious, final test of his character. And he had passed with flying colors. The greatest gift he had given me was the gift of his own integrity. My quiet life also included a new, unexpected relationship. Mr. Milton, the lawyer, started visiting the Sunstone not just for legal matters, but for social calls. He was a widower, a quiet man who understood the value of hard work and quiet dignity. We would sit on the porch, not discussing court battles, but sharing stories of our pasts, the struggles, and the victories. We began taking long walks through the vineyard, talking about everything and nothing. He was the first man I had felt a connection with since Arthur's death 37 years ago. It was a gentle, earned connection, based on shared respect and mutual admiration for resilience. He saw me as Eleanor, the strong woman, not Eleanor, the victim or the rich vineyard owner. Patrick, seeing the quiet happiness, pulled me aside one day. "Mom, Mr. Milton is a good man. You deserve this, after everything. You approve?" I teased, remembering his fierce protection of Serafina. "I approve of any man who would fight for you the way he did, and then respect you enough to let you win the peace on your own terms," Patrick replied, his eyes full of love. My life was a masterpiece of recovery. The vineyard was thriving, the community was benefiting, and the man I loved most in the world had found his true self. I had built a legacy far greater than I could have ever imagined. As my 76th birthday approached, I decided to formally step back from the daily management of the Sunstone Vineyard. I named Ricardo, the foreman Patrick had assisted during the crisis harvest, as the new vineyard operations director. He was a man who understood the land, the workers, and the importance of the foundation's mission. I called Patrick to my office, the newly renovated annex, which I had transformed into a small, elegant workspace, to give him the news. "I'm retiring, Patrick," I announced, a profound sense of closure in my voice. "The foundation is stable, the vineyard is healthy, and the legacy is secure. It's time for me to live a life free of obligation." Patrick beamed. "That's wonderful, Mom. You've earned 1,000 years of peace. And I want you to take my place," I added. "Not as the owner, but as the executive director of the Arthur Vance Foundation." He stared at me, his eyes wide with shock. "Me, Mom? I'm running a logistics company. I don't know the first thing about running a nonprofit." "You know the most important thing," I countered. "You know what it's like to have nothing. You know the temptation of entitlement, and you know the hard road back to self-respect. That is the experience the foundation needs. You will manage the money, the board, and the scholarship program. But you will never own the land. You will simply be its most dedicated steward." He stood up, walking to the window, looking out at the rows of vines that had once been his ultimate goal. He wasn't looking at the $7 million valuation, he was looking at the history. "I accept, Mom," he said, turning back, his voice solemn. "I promise you, I will guard this legacy with my life. I will never let anyone, especially myself, forget what this land truly represents." It was the most important transfer of power in the vineyard's history, and it was done with a handshake and a shared purpose, not a lawyer's signature and a threat. My new life with Mr. Milton, Ethan, as I now called him, began with a gentle rhythm. He closed a small law office, handing his practice over to a younger associate, and we began to travel. We weren't chasing exotic luxury, we were chasing quiet, meaningful experiences. We spent 2 weeks driving through the heartland of America, stopping at small, independent farms, talking to the people, and connecting with the quiet dignity of earned labor. We drove past a prison one afternoon. My heart tightened, thinking of Serafina, who was still serving her sentence. "Do you ever think about her, Eleanor?" Ethan asked softly. "Sometimes," I admitted. "I don't wish her harm. I just hope that she finds a way to earn her freedom when she gets out, not just from the walls, but from her own greed. She destroyed her life chasing a number. It's a sad thing. I was free of the resentment, free of the bitterness. My heart was light." Our journey eventually led us back to Napa, where we settled into my old farmhouse. Ethan was a kind, steady presence, a man who loved my strength and respected my history. We were two survivors, finding comfort and love in the quiet twilight of our lives. The final, public confirmation of Patrick's change came during the next foundation board meeting. A wealthy, self-important donor tried to influence the scholarship process, demanding a spot for his underqualified nephew in exchange for a $100,000 gift. Patrick, my son, the new executive director, stood up to him without flinching. "Sir," Patrick said, his voice ringing with authority, "the Arthur Vance Foundation does not trade integrity for money. Our scholarships are awarded based purely on merit and need, not donations. We don't want your gift if it comes with the price of our soul. Good day." He was defending the foundation with the same passion I had used to defend the land. I sat there, watching him, a single tear of pride rolling down my cheek. He had learned the lesson so deeply, he was now teaching it to others. The legacy was not the vineyard, The legacy was the man he had become. 5 years passed in a blur of meaningful work and quiet joy. I was now 77 years old. The Sunstone Vineyard, under the guidance of the foundation and the careful management of Patrick, flourished beyond all expectation. The scholarship program had supported over 50 students, and the foundation had become a beacon of hope for the entire valley. Patrick's personal life also found a beautiful, earned stability. He met a woman named Clara, a hard-working, compassionate veterinarian who ran a small animal rescue. She saw Patrick for the man he was, humble, dedicated, and kind, not for the potential inheritance he no longer possessed. They married in a small, simple ceremony right on the porch of the farmhouse, with the old vines standing as silent, proud witnesses. The wedding cost perhaps $5,000, a far cry from the $95,000 spectacle Serafina had demanded, and it was filled with genuine love and laughter. A year later, they welcomed a baby girl into the world. They named her Eleanor, after me. Holding little Eleanor Vance in my arms, I finally felt the circle of my life complete. I looked at my son, the man who was once consumed by greed, now a loving husband and a devoted father, working tirelessly to support his family and his community. "You taught me everything, Mom," Patrick whispered, his eyes filled with love as he looked at his daughter. "You taught me that the only thing worth fighting for is integrity. Everything else is just dust." "And you taught me, son," I replied, "that the soul of a mother is never truly broken. It simply has to harden into steel to protect the core of love." My relationship with Ethan grew into a deep, abiding partnership. We decided to formalize our bond, not with a grand wedding, but with a quiet, private ceremony in the vineyard's old chapel. Patrick and Clara were our only guests. It was a testament to the fact that earned love is the most valuable kind. I also received a letter that marked the final closure of the old wounds. It was from Serafina. She had been released from prison and was working at a low-paying factory job in a small, distant town. The letter was short, written on simple paper, devoid of arrogance or entitlement. "Eleanor, I am sorry. I deserved everything I got. I hope you and Patrick find happiness. Thank you for showing me what real strength looks like. I hope to earn my life back, one honest day at a time." I didn't reply, but I filed the letter away. I had wished her well, and now I could finally let go. My final act of stewardship came on my 80th birthday. I formally transferred my remaining lifetime usage rights to the Arthur Vance Foundation. I wanted the foundation to be completely independent, to live on beyond my lifetime, immune from any future family disputes. I kept a small, private apartment in the old farmhouse. The annex, once threatened to be my dusty prison, was now my bright, beloved sanctuary. I sat on the porch that day, watching Patrick, my son, playing with my granddaughter, Eleanor, beneath the shade of the old oak tree. The sun set over the sunstone, the rows of vines glowing gold. I had given everything, lost everything, and fought for everything. And in the end, I had gained more than any $7 million valuation could ever measure. I had gained peace, purpose, and the unconditional love of a son who had finally found his way. My journey from a grieving widow with $200,000 in debt to the wise matriarch of a flourishing community trust was complete. My life was no longer defined by what happened to me, but by how I chose to respond. I had chosen dignity. I had chosen justice. And I had chosen love. I am now 82 years old, and my life at the Sunstone Vineyard is the very definition of a peaceful, earned twilight. I spend my days tending my rose garden, reading classic literature, and simply enjoying the presence of my family. The vineyard continues to thrive under Patrick's dedicated leadership of the foundation. The 350 acres of land are no longer just a business, they are a monument to the values of hard work and integrity. The foundation has expanded its reach, now funding a program that teaches financial literacy and business skills to young, aspiring entrepreneurs from low-income families, a direct result of Patrick's own humbling journey. He is paying forward the toughest lesson he ever learned. I look at Patrick now and see the best parts of his father and the hardest won strength of myself. He is a responsible, dedicated man, respected not because of the name he carries, but because of the character he embodies. The boy who demanded $7 million worth of land now spends his life ensuring that others have the tools to earn their own success. My granddaughter, Eleanor, runs through the rows of the vines, her laughter echoing the simple joys of a life free from entitlement. I know she will never have to learn the lesson of self-worth the brutal way her father did. She will inherit something far more valuable than land or money, the knowledge that her family's foundation is built on honesty, not wealth. My final, crucial lesson came one quiet morning as I was pruning the ancient wisteria that grows over the farmhouse. I realized that my long life was a reflection of the vineyard itself. It had been nearly destroyed by neglect, almost poisoned by greed, but ultimately saved by fierce, relentless dedication. The true legacy of the Sunstone Vineyard is not the wine, the $7 million valuation, or the foundation's annual profit. It is the story of a mother who refused to surrender her dignity, and a son who, through painful loss, finally found his soul. It is the understanding that you are not entitled, a phrase that transcends money and becomes a moral absolute. I have found true love, raised a man of character, and built a legacy that will help thousands long after I am gone. My heart is whole, my conscience is clear, and my spirit is free. I am Eleanor Vance, the woman who built a dynasty from debt and saved a soul from entitlement. My greatest inheritance is the peace I have earned. And what about you? My journey taught me that the hardest act of love is allowing a loved one to fall so they can learn how to rise with true self-respect. Could you be brave enough to choose their character over their comfort? If you're struggling with a relationship defined by expectation, remember, dignity is worth more than any fortune. I want to hear your story of tough love and resilience. Share your thoughts and insights in the comments section below. And if you believe that every painful chapter holds a powerful lesson, make sure to register your subscription to the channel and hit the notification bell so we can continue to learn together how to live a life not of luxury, but of profound, earned worth.